Very good evening, namaste, and welcome to Citti Media. My name is Citti, and I'm your host. As Republic Day approaches, we have put together a panel of wonderful, very insightful people who are bringing us analysis about security situation in India and across the globe. Joining me today for a conversation for the first time is Lieutenant General Himalay Singh, who's the first three-star general from the Northeast, Rami Desai, and Mr. Jaideep Saikia. Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me. How have all of you been?
Great.
Thank you, Sharon.
First of all, there's so much to cover. In fact, and I think we have less than 45 minutes. So let me just get to the first question. General Himalay Singh, you have served in various capacities, but there's also so many security concerns as 2022 has emerged, right? Like there's things that are happening in Kashmir, Punjab, there's a reignition of conflict in the Northeast. So what would your highlight of main security concerns for 2022 be, according to you?
Firstly, thank you very much, Sharon, for inviting me to this very, very important subject, a discussion which is much sought after these days. As far as 2022, that is the coming year, security concerns of India, according to me, would be the northern and the western front, in the sense that some kind of a Chinese activism along with the Pakistani nexus. So I think that will be a very, very huge challenge in the year 2022. Reasons are obvious, because the Chinese PLA and the Chinese Communist Party, they refuse to recognize our northern borders as the international boundary. And that we saw in the form of what happened in Galwan. After that, there has been huge deficit of trust between the two countries. And we have had many 14 rounds of talks at the Corps Commanders level. And this is likely to end not in the near future. According to me, I believe that this is linked not only with the international border, but also to the geopolitical developments around the region. What is happening in Afghanistan, and as far as China is concerned, Taiwan, South China Sea, and even Article 370, removal of Article 70, all this affect, their CPEC efforts and all. So I believe that China factor, duly assisted by Pakistani role in the region, will be a huge security challenge for us.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for your opening words. Rami Desai, Ramiji, thank you so much again for joining us, seeing you after a while. How have you been?
Sharon, thank you as ever for inviting me. I've been very well. Thank you.
I'm really glad to hear that. And I see that there's a change of location. But let me get to my question. You recently wrote an article. It's a very interesting article, and we went through it. So it's basically about the anti-terror doctrine for India, and it was received very well. So given the security concerns that India is facing at the moment, what is the relevance for such a doctrine for India, and why is it so important?
Well, Sharon, first of all, let me say that I am so glad to be on this panel with two gentlemen who I think are absolutely, authorities on security and conflict and such expertise. So for me, it's a real honor to be on this panel. As for the article, which was jointly, with Jaideep, who has been a co-author of mine on many other articles as well, and I am so glad to receive the kind of support I do from him. The article for me was really, really important because the article asked some really pertinent questions, which I think, we put out there so that everybody can think about it. For instance, it's important to understand why we don't have a doctrine at this point. And if we don't, the question which needs to be asked at this juncture is, why has India not unveiled an anti-terrorism doctrine? Is it because it continues to grope around for a comprehensive definition of what constitutes terror, which is anyway a murky subject around the world? Or is it because its unique belief system, that India has, deliberately wants a flexible anti-terrorism policy? Or has it, in the face of inability to formulate a flexible policy, kept clear of any doctrine formulation whatsoever? So it's important for us to understand what is at the core of us not having one, considering there are all these conflict and strategic issues that we have to deal with. But we have to understand that this is in the light of the fact that India has faced, is faced with a dilemma that also stems from the fact that there exists a non-articulation, articulated perception of policy making circles, that there is an inherent distinction between ethnic militancy, like we've seen in India, like NACN or ULFA, or on the other hand, Islamist groups such as JEM or LET or any other. It could, I think well have been egged on by the fact that in the Indian experience with ethnic militancy has not been completely like negative. Like if you look at the Mizo National Front, which eventually, we had people like Lal Denga come out of it. And, so, maybe it's not been such a negative experience that India has had. So, this is a really tricky topic, but I think the article was intended to make us think as to what are the factors that are limiting us from creating this.
Right. But is there a particular reason why India never formalizes any of its doctrines or strategies for that matter? I don't think we even have a cyber strategy as of now, something that's formalized and on paper. So in that sense, how would you differentiate between an anti-terror doctrine and a national security strategy?
See, I don't think cybersecurity, we're still at a very nascent stage. I think we are coming to it. The more we learn about it, the more we start talking about it, the more problems that we deal with, the understanding will improve. But unfortunately, this is an issue that is not just limited to India, it's limited to across the world. Like I said, it's a really tricky topic. There are loads of diversionary arguments, that are still blocking a consensus on what is important in terms of anti-terrorist sort of strategies. For some people, terrorism is, which I think is really far-flung, but terrorists can be freedom fighters. So it's a difficult debate because you have two different arguments, and these diversionary arguments that we have, become into human rights issues. So, these arguments have to be settled once and for all. And like I said, it's not limited to India. This is a problem that exists in the international community as well. And this sort of diversionary argument, in my opinion, is absolutely ridiculous because it glorifies criminal activity, it glorifies massacres, it glorifies killing of innocent civilians.
Yes.
And on one hand, it condemns killing of others, So who is to choose? But I don't think this argument has a lot of metal. I think we need to be very clear. The international community needs to come to a consensus as to what is the definition of terrorism and what falls within that ambit.
I'm glad you brought that up, especially because Kashmir and the Northeast has been in the news, and the Western media is somehow very perceptive about how they see security developments in these two regions. So, Mr. Saikia, you've been writing about these regions for a very long time now. How would you characterize the two extremities, in a brief way? You're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I think General Himalay has already given an outline of what's has come to pass in the Western extremity, as it were. I'd say only one thing, that the Taliban was a creation of Pakistan. And you sort of hark back to a person called Nasrullah Babar, Major General Nasrullah Babar, who was Interior Minister of Benazir Bhutto, who actually created the Taliban, the seekers, as it were, way back in the 1990s. And he used to refer to them as my boys. So when they got too much inside Pakistan, they were handed over another country, which is Afghanistan. Now they're back into the seat of power in Afghanistan. So I think Pakistan, and as the general has said, Pakistan, China, and now the Taliban, the Troika, as it were, are shepherding two important groups after the territorial ouster of the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria from the territorial, contours that they were confined to in Iraq and Syria. So, the Troika of China, Pakistan, and the Taliban are going to be using these groups, the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, of course, in a different avatar now, Islamic State of the Khorasan province, to enter the Indian subcontinent, primarily Kashmir. And you have seen some rumblings, and I think the general has referred to about the Khalistan movement also. So I think, that's as far as the Western aspect is concerned. But what is more alarming as far as the northeastern or the eastern extremity is concerned is that you have suddenly seen a resurgence of the insurgent activity once again. And this is because, I think, primarily because of what happened in 2020 and the intrusion by China in eastern Ladakh. I mean, that's a very far-fetched theory, but I have been able to sort of put my finger on it by saying that the humiliation it faced in eastern Ladakh has led it to sort of, rethink its strategy for the eastern sector. So they're basically going to use a different, irregular warfare, as it were, as far as the eastern sector or the northeast is concerned. And that is why they are propping up or entering the northeast insurgency game in a different manner by way of proxy. And the manifestation of that was felt in the Churachandpur attack on the 46 Assam rifles. And in the days to come, I fear that you might have actually more such attacks planned by Chinese planners and chaperones for these IIGs or the Indian insurgent groups. So basically, you have two pincer movements from the east and the west. And if caution is not exercised by the government of India and the Indian state, you might actually have a marrying up of these two pincers somewhere in the general area of Siliguri corridor, which actually would sort of sever the northeast from the rest of the country. I'd sort of immediately leave it at that.
I'm glad you brought up Khalistani threat as well, but amidst the entire politicized debate, we need to be very careful about how we address the actual security concerns as well. And I think General Himalay Singh can address it the best. So we see a renewed strategy that Pakistan adopts every year. They keep trying nevertheless, and I think at least there needs to be a consolation prize for that. In that sense, you see ISI footprints over a lot of internal designs in India, whether it's the Khalistani movement or Kashmiri extremism. Going forward, since the previous attempts have failed, and also there's the abrogation of Article 370, which happened, what renewed efforts do you foresee in Kashmir and as far as Khalistani movements are concerned that Pakistan can possibly do?
Sharon, I'd like to answer your question a little in the broader sense. Post withdrawal of US troops from Afghanistan, there has been a huge churning of terrorist activities in Afghanistan, in AFPAC region, Afghanistan and Pakistan region, particularly in the northern part of Afghanistan. you have the ISIS-K, you have the TTP, which is fighting the Pakistani forces. Then you have the Taliban. And also, I suspect that the great game between powerful countries like Russia, US, China, Iran, and India and Pakistan have already begun in this region. When I say region, it includes the western part of Pakistan and the entire Afghanistan. So therefore, how this game is going to play out in the near future is something that is being debated all over the world. There may be these terrorist groups may be planning the next 9/11 or whatever, we don't know. But their course of actions, are not known, but we do know that northern Afghanistan and the part of northwestern Pakistan is the hub of terrorists as of today, of all kinds. Therefore, linking this to Pakistan, how will Pakistan play out? Because going by the national security policy of Pakistan, which was just published on 14th of January, they have made all the right noises. They have mentioned things like they want, quote, just and peaceful, neighborhood, resolution of Kashmir, and things like that. They have not spoken much against India as such. They have mentioned India in the passing. However, they have made a point that Jammu and Kashmir will be their moral support and their political support, everything will be there. Therefore, I'm trying to link it with, the Punjab issue also. Therefore, Pakistan, because of the financial condition, in fact, this national security policy of Pakistan actually talks about geoeconomics. For the first time, we are hearing this, that geoeconomics will be a
Right.
priority in their policy. So therefore, but there is another part of the national security policy which is classified. We don't know what is inside that, but I have read what is in the open domain. So they have made the right noises as far as Kashmir is concerned, as far as India is concerned, not that hardline kind of attitude. But going by the experience in the past, I am, as a soldier who have served in Indian Army for 40 years, I suspect their intentions, and I'm very, very sure that Kashmir cannot be, shelved in their India policy. They will go for it. And what better to do it in tandem as far as Punjab is concerned?
Yeah.
The drugs from Afghanistan, the narcotics and weapons which are being dropped by, there have been many reports being dropped, via the drone and all that. So therefore, there is a likelihood. But mind you, Punjab is a very serious, very, very sensitive issue for India.
Yes.
We have the maximum number of, history of, valor, history of, the Punjab being the, hub of all many activities in the past. So
Right.
therefore, we have to be extremely careful not to club the entire. It's only a small handful. Those who are maybe based in US or Canada or UK, those who are
Yeah.
making much noise. But we have to be extremely careful while dealing with this. So I will not broad brush the Pakistani activities in Punjab,
Yeah.
because they are a handful, and I'm sure that Indian state can handle this Punjab as of today. But we have to be extremely careful, extremely sensitive about it.
Correct.
And as Jaideep mentioned about Kashmir, last year we had about 200 terrorists killed, which is not a small number. So there is, as the political process picks up, in the near future in Jammu and Kashmir, we'll come to know more about secessionists and what are their process and all. But I firmly believe that Article 370 is removal is an irreversible issue, and India, we cannot compromise on this.
Right.
We cannot compromise, and Pakistan needs to be extremely clear that the people of India's resolve to have Kashmir. While we appreciate the peaceful negotiated settlement, I think our chief of the army staff also made a statement a few days back about the resolution of Kashmir, Siachen Glacier. So that is it. We have a huge challenge ahead
But just
in the near
a quick
future.
follow-up, sir. I mean, it's been almost a few months ever since the Taliban took over Afghanistan, and there's always been a constant talk about a possible influx of terrorist activities in Kashmir as a result of a spillover effect. What do we see so far, and also is it a little overrated in the sense that overhyped, perhaps?
Okay, it's a very, very good question. I faced this many times. In my view, uh, Taliban themselves are, I mean, their commitment in Afghanistan has grown many times, many fold because of the ISIS and other terrorist activities in Afghanistan itself. I was, when I was Corps Commander in Jammu and Kashmir in 2014, I had anticipated that the spillover of these jihadis might affect the peace in Jammu and Kashmir. But as things turned out, the geopolitics and what is happening in Pakistan itself, what is happening in Afghanistan itself, and also in the Central Asian region, I am now of the opinion that we need not, um, you know, overestimate the intervention by the spillover of Taliban factor in Jammu and Kashmir. Yet we should expect, because those people who fought in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, they are not only from Afghanis. There have been many from Middle East and various countries. So these people in the garb of Muslim Brotherhood, some of them may could, in fact, some of them could definitely, get involved in Kashmiri, but I don't see a deluge or a huge influx of attempt by these people to come to Kashmir as yet. Because, as I said, the great game being played in Afghanistan is yet to be, unfold itself in the next near future.
Thank you so much, sir, for that update. Ramiji, I'd like you to address a couple of very sensitive issues, of course, because you can do that with finesse. Now, one is obviously the Amar Jawan Jyoti being replaced or rather merged with the National War Memorial. And this has ignited a lot of debate and it's being politicized. But in that sense, could you give a little clarity about what exactly the government intends to do and whether this is right or wrong in your own perspective?
Um, Sharon, I'm very pleased that you say I can do this with finesse. I'm not quite sure if I can, but having said that, I think it's ridiculous, because the word that was used by the opposition was extinguished. The flame has been extinguished, which is completely wrong. It's misinformation. This is fake news being spread, which is one of the problems that we deal with. It's not being extinguished. It was merged with in the war memorial. And I think it's really, really important to have a place like the War Memorial, because the Amar Jawan Jyoti at this point was in the middle of, was in the middle of a roundabout with all this traffic around. What is a memorial? A memorial is where you go and pay your respects. It is where you are meant to have some sanctity, some peace, relatives of the fallen soldiers should be able to go there and pay their respects and feel closer to what they've lost. This was not possible there. Having said that, there's also a logistical issue associated to this, because you can't have two places. If there is a place like the War Memorial specifically designed for this purpose, then why do you need a second place? Number three, none of the names of the fallen soldiers were etched previously. The War Memorial recognizes each and every soldier that has made the supreme sacrifice. And I think that's really, really important to, for us as a civilization to have this in our civilizational memory. Now, the problem only arose when the opposition decided that this needs to be made into an issue and somehow it can be manipulated. To which I will say that the job of an opposition is not to oppose everything that a government does. There can be constructive, there can be a constructive opposition as well. The opposition needn't be destructive. Unfortunately, politics has become so severely, the fault lines are so severe in politics in India that the opposition feels that it has to just oppose for the sake of opposing, which is
Yeah.
not acceptable.
I think Arun Jaitley had a word for it, compulsive contrarians, and that's what it's come down to. Thank you for sharing that. Mr. Saikia, there are a couple of questions on the foreign policy front. And it's really concerning, especially because India has been trying to sort of settle things in the neighborhood as far as our bilateral ties with other countries are concerned. Now, China is moving in very closer to Sri Lanka and Nepal, and they're even attempting to reach out to Bhutan to solve the boundary issue. There are different developments on Myanmar front, and Pakistan, as we know, is always a problem for us. So, in that sense, what should we do differently for a neighborhood first policy to make it more effective? And also, as far as India's Act East policy is concerned, how many developments do you see happening on that front, and what needs to be reworked on?
Yeah, that's a very, very pertinent question that you ask, Sharanji. I think we need to rework and recalibrate our the neighborhood first policy in a major way. I think the string of pearls theory, which came into prominence almost a decade ago about China constructing a string of pearls, is slowly, in my view, coming out to be true. They have sort of, tried to encircle us by sort of, getting very robust inroads into all our neighbors, including Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. Pakistan, of course, has always been an all-weather ally and a friend, and of late Myanmar. So, we have to sort of, recalibrate the policy. Let me sort of address the issue about northeastern Myanmar, for instance. Now, almost a year has passed. It'll complete a year on the 1st of February 2022, when the military takeover happened in Myanmar, for instance. And India is yet to sort of have a clear-cut policy on Myanmar. That doesn't augur well for a country which is looking ahead to be a regional superpower of some sort. My take on this whole thing is that we need to do business with whoever is there in power in Naypyidaw at this point of time. Aung San Suu Kyi has been sentenced to a term of prison, and I don't see democracy returning in the way we thought it would in 2015. The mandate was sort of going ahead, and military being the biggest stakeholder in Myanmar will continue to sort of have its run large. So I think, if Act East policy, you mentioned that, and the whole question about Indian insurgent groups billeted in Myanmar have to be sort of taken into consideration. That is both economy and security. I think we have to recalibrate the policy and, do business with whoever is in power in Naypyidaw.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, Himalay is here. He'll understand these things better than I do. I think, we might even consider actually, not sort of naming names just because General Himalay is here, but the fact of the matter is, I think the military idiom, which is understood by both these countries, are far better than the way our Mandarins in South Block, by which I mean the foreign service, the personnel, I think the military idiom is slightly better. Perhaps by way of an experimentation, we could sort of, send an envoy who has a military background to Naypyidaw. to Yangon. And as far as Bangladesh is concerned, I've always had I've always been of the view that there are two Bangladeshis, and gratefully we have a very good friend and ally in Sheikh Hasina. But then we should also be very circumspect about the fact that we're putting all our eggs in one basket. That is, if God forbid there were to be a rerun of 1975 when the father of the nation of Bangladesh, Bangabandhu, Sheikh Hasina's father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, was assassinated with almost his entire family, or just his two daughters, Sheikh Hasina and Sheikh Rahana, were away. And then, things would go wrong. As a matter
That
of
is
fact,
true, especially because of the anti-Hindu riots that happened recently. Now, the only thing that people were grateful for was that Sheikh Hasina was in power. And that shouldn't be something that we need to be satisfied with, especially in our own neighborhood, because it can
I
have
will tell you
some sort of
something, Sharonji, when I went for a track 2 in 2016, the international affairs advisor to Sheikh Hasina came to meet me in Dhaka Club. And I'm saying this is because I'm a patriotic Indian, and I think our policymakers should understand this. He told me that, Jaideep, we need to create an opposition. We do not have an opposition inside the Sanshad, inside the Bangladesh parliament. Everybody is out there in the streets. And this is precisely what's going wrong. You do not have, Ramiji referred to constructive opposition. They do not have an opposition inside the Sanshad. Everybody is out in the streets. So you see, they're baying for her blood. But more importantly, there are people within the Awami League who would be naturally opposing her policies. And some of these people, and without naming names, could actually be closet Chinese. The Chinese are trying to sort of have a finger in every pie. And that is precisely why I'm a little concerned about the fact that we are hedging all our, our bets on one single person, Sheikh Hasina. God forbid if something were to happen, and we have seen history, and I have read history to an extent, if was something to happen, then things might sort of go back to what happened in 1975, just 5 years after India helped the liberation of Bangladesh. So I think we have to do some serious rethinking as far as a neighborhood first policy is concerned, whether it is about Myanmar, whether it is about Bangladesh, and certainly about Sri Lanka, Hambantota, and whether it is bad debts, etc. But the fact of the matter is China is all over the place. And the string of pearl theory, which some among many have been talking about for long, and at that point of time, I confess, I thought it was just a bit of a, conspiracy theory, but it seems to be coming out true. And of course, the MOU with Bhutan, for instance, I am of the opinion that probably it is something they went into, Phimpu went into after having consulted New Delhi. They wouldn't have done that because I think Bhutan is perhaps the last real ally we have in the neighborhood. But as far as the other countries are concerned, as you said very correctly, I think we have to be very, very careful. The dragon is actually fuming fire and brimstone, and
Thank you.
The humiliation in Eastern Ladakh has given it sort of an opening. And that's precisely why we have to be very careful and look at the entire thing anew.
Thank you so much for sharing that. General Himalay Singh, because of the security concerns that India is facing as of now, that also stems from a lot of religious dogmas, extremism that is. India and a lot of security experts and think tanks have been calling for a de-radicalization policy. Although we've seen several efforts, perhaps like Operation Pigeon in Kerala, these are all isolated efforts here and there. There's no doctrine or a strategy as such. I mean, if we were to take it a step further, I think Mr. Saikia has also suggested that we have a counter-radicalization policy. So, but on a serious note, what do we need to do about this, especially because India has such diversity, such pluralism, and so many different security concerns to deal with?
It's a very, very, again, another very interesting subject, but I'll try and make it as per my understanding. The first and foremost danger I see from this radicalized environment is the social media. It is the social media or the misuse of it that is spreading hatred more and more. And also the issue of, religious teachings in various forms. Incidentally, you are aware that, the most radical Islam, I think, originated from our Bareilly and you know uh,
Right, right.
Yeah.
yeah, within India itself. So
Right.
therefore, we have a real concern. But once again, I must caution that it's not the entire population, but it is spreading faster than one can think of, mainly due to the social media. And Jaideep Saikia mentioned about counter, radicalization, because de-radicalized means people are already radicalized and you de-radicalize. But counter means, preventing radicalization, to my mind, is the first approach that the state governments, the center, and all of us should be working on, because the danger is real. And you can't have such kind of that, okay, if you don't follow my belief, then you are a enemy. This kind of a thinking is definitely spreading faster than we would like it to be. So therefore, I endorse what Jaideep Saikia mentioned, and it is happening in many parts of India. Jaideep mentioned about northeastern India, in Jammu and Kashmir, as also other parts of our country. It's a very, very serious concern, internal security matter. I'm sure the authorities are alive to it. I'm very sure of that. But because of political and other social issues, and also our various laws that we have, we may not be able to take kinetic action as we want, but I would strongly recommend that this be addressed at a very, very serious note from now on before it is too late. Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you, sir. It is true indeed, because it's not possible to sort of monitor everything that happens, goes on in social media, and that's become a very, very large concern for us. Ramiji, just adding on to what General Himalaya Singh said, we've seen a lot of events even within the borders of India now, not to be particular about any particular religion, but when it comes to national security, there has to be certain sensitivities involved, because no religion or no person of a particular religion can go out and say that, we are the only truth and my God is the only God that's real and yours is not. And because of that, you see, even if you were to deal with radical Islam and to elements that endorse such an extremist viewpoint, you need to deal with them with sensitivity. And events like the Dharma Sansad, which happened in Uttarakhand, sort of break those sensitivities and cause a lot of radicalization in that sense. So India is a home for 200 million Muslims, and although we have problems in Kashmir and Kerala and other parts, there needs to be some sensibilities involved with how we deal with terrorism and extremism, right? So what would you say about these events that happen in that sense, which perhaps hurt de-radicalization efforts?
Um, Sharon, first of all, in my opinion, when we're talking about dealing with radicalization, I don't think there needs to be any sensitivity towards it. Let me say this at the outset, that there are no winners in radicalization. Any radical thought. I do not in any form or language support any type of extremist thought. Our civilizational ethos itself rests on like balance, balance of mind. We talk about this all the time, balance of thought, balance of speech. But however, I find that it is harder, far harder to achieve balance than it is to be radical. But balance also means the onus of peace and civility lies on the shoulders of all major stakeholders. And that is why I find you mentioning Dharm Sansad, I'm not trying to put you on a spot here, but a little bit strange because you haven't mentioned, let's say, a Varis Pathan threatening Hindus in an AIMIM rally, political rally, saying the time has come for Muslims to unite and achieve freedom. He reminded Hindus after what they've been through, and this is where sensitivity, if it has to come in, it has to come in here, is that they can dominate us. So Hindus must be scared of them. This is what he said. Or an Amanatullah Khan, who openly calls for the beheading of Swami Yati Narsinganand, whatever. You may like him, you may not like him, but is that the ethos? Is that the law of this country? It isn't. Or an Owaisi, who commands such sort of popular loyalty amongst his community, saying, remove police for 15 minutes, we could finish off 100 crore Hindus. Or saying that terrorist Yaqub Menon had to be hanged because there were not enough Muslims in the parliament. Where is the sensitivity then? I can go on, even in during the CA, we saw people openly threatening to wage jihad, if India didn't reject the CAA and the NRC. But, having said that, General Singh also mentioned the Barelvi school of thought. These are complete schools. These are complete organizations and populations that back these organizations. The Raza Academy is a proponent of the Barelvi school of thought. And what did the Raza Academy do? It asked for blasphemy laws. This is the bill that it wanted to be passed in a country like this. So I think when we talk about radicalization, we need to look at when we talk, look at it in a different way. If we look at the Dharm Sansad, it was a motley bunch of people, who were listening to these, so-called proponents of, radical thought, who really could not even form, they can't even properly form a proper group, Whereas when you look at these rallies being addressed, these are hundreds and thousands of people. That is serious radicalization. I don't think Dharm Sansad is a one-off instance. Having said that, I have to say that India by nature is a largely, Hindu homeland, and therefore it is egalitarian in nature. And therefore, there has been the kind of growth of so-called minority populations as we have seen. I don't consider the Muslim or the Christian populations, honestly, to be minorities any longer. And we need to stop safeguarding radicalization by giving them this cover fire by calling them minorities. It is because this country has been passive that such statements and open threats in political rallies can be made against the majority community. However, of course, the real minorities, on the other hand, however, I believe are, let's say, the Parsis or the Buddhists, because if you look at Assam itself, if there's 34% Muslim population, that affects a huge amount of constituency seats in Assam. By no stretch of imagination do they remain minority. So I think the onus lies on these societies to understand that it is within their community that serious radicalization is happening, and the society needs to step up and condemn this radicalization. The problem is within the society, there is support that is given. I was on a debate once, and this was during the time where there was a call for Wasim Rizvi's beheading. And I asked the person who was supporting this, I said, will you condemn this on TV? And he could not condemn it because he knew the repercussions of him condemning something like this would have far-reaching impacts on him and possibly his family as well. You look at Punjab, you look at Tamil Nadu, there's an explosion of conversions. In Punjab, you have a Christian CM, possibly because they need to woo the Christians, the crypto-Christians, the huge conversions that have been happening. They need to woo these populations. So, I think, when we talk about all of this, when we talk about sensitivity, we have to understand who is it impacting, the kind of populations it is impacting, and is it an organized bid to radicalize or not? And I think in the case of Dharm Sansad, it was very unfortunate. I condemn what they say, but being a part of the so-called majority population in this country, I feel safe condemning my own people,
Right.
which is what does not happen on the opposite side.
Yeah. While we are discussing radicalization, Jaideep ji, let me ask you this, and then we'll probably ask for concluding remarks from everybody. I think even General Himalay Singh brought up the issue of homegrown extremist schools such as the Deobandi school and Barelvi school, right? So in that sense, what can we do in terms of curbing the efforts to further the religious dogmas that are spread through these radical schools? Because this has escalated to an extent where you see the effect of such radical schools of thought even in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that's become a very big concern in the neighborhood totally.
Well, as far as radicalization inside India is concerned, as a matter of fact, I spoke about it yesterday in the international conference on global counter-terrorism, which was, and I just have a three-step movement really. I think we must understand that the radical elements which have entered India are not enormous in that sense. I would say there would be, say, if I were to quantify, I would say it would be, what, say, about 2 to 5% of the population. No, but that's very important. You don't need an entire battalion to sort of set off an IED blast. You just need a person. Just to give you an analogy. But what we must do by way of steps is, A, we must psychologically segregate the minority population which these radical elements, however minuscule in their numbers, from infusing or indoctrinating this radical thought into the minority population, which in some cases they are more Indian than I am, at least in the Northeast and Assam, where radicalization efforts are on in a very big way, which is as being reported. That is A. Number two, I think we must also use the minority population to battle this alien agenda, which is slowly coming upon us. I refer to the two pincers. We must stop them in the gateways. We must not allow the pincers to come into the heartland where they can marry up, and then then we will have a sort of a problem in the hands where we cannot do anything. It will lead to a civil war situation. So that's number two. I think in Assam, since 2014, since I was a little part of the dispensation in some way or the other, we have been very successfully using important personalities from the minority community to speak out against the Islamic State, for instance. We used a singer who went big in the national arena, Nahida Freen, to sing against the Islamic State. And that was very, very, very well accepted by the minority population as actually. And thirdly, alluding to what General Himalay Singh said, if all fails, I think we would have to fall back on kinetic action. And by kinetic action, I would say that I think it is important to sever the important umbilical cord or the linkage between these radical elements and the target population that they are sort of trying to infuse this or indoctrinate radical thought into. So in other words, neutralize the second rung of leadership. So if these three things are combined, and as I have said, and I think General Himalay has echoed me in that sense that there is nothing called de-radicalization. It's extremely difficult because we have seen that there has been cases of recidivism when people have been thought to have been de-radicalized, but actually not done. We do not have a science as yet which looks into the brain of a person or a mind of a person and say that, well, this person has been de-radicalized. That is why the only way we can stop this menace from actually, proliferating in a very big way is to actually counter-radicalize.
Right.
And I've just given out these three aspects, if the Indian state is listening, perhaps it can sort of, go forward with
In
these.
fact, just a few weeks back, I was speaking to senior Canadian intelligence officer, and he was who was involved in the early 2000s when the Al Qaeda was at its peak. And in fact, he was telling me that Canada's de-radicalization program was not as effective because once you even de-radicalize and there are certain parameters to it, people would immediately after in the aftermath join Iraq and Syria to fight a jihad, right? So in that sense, how do you even quantify or even qualify that a person has been completely de-radicalized? So in that sense, it's a challenge, and I'm really glad that you brought that up. Unfortunately, due to a paucity of time, we'll have to cut this short. But before we conclude, General Himalay Singh, there are obviously a lot of limitations as far as our approach to national security is concerned are there. And whatever you can state publicly, of course, but what does India need to prioritize and work on, and should there be a rechange in our approach? Because time and again we've been approaching a lot of these security issues with an old school agenda. So especially as far as China is concerned, for that matter, there's a heated debate about how we need to approach the Chinese in terms of negotiating the boundary issues, etc.
Thank you. To sum up, I'll say that to your question, the first question, it brings me to your first question, what is the greatest challenge? Greatest challenge, even though I mentioned about the northern frontiers, it is the entire security scenario today is what the security specialists, call it gray zone warfare. It means it's a combination of all types of activities against another, against the enemy or potential enemy. So to my mind, that is a huge challenge. And for that, it is not just the intelligence agencies or, police or the military or anything. It's a it's a comprehensive approach that we need to take. And for that, you mentioned, I think you asked Rami also, that national security policy. As of today, we don't have a national security policy. Pakistan has just issued one. So I think to begin with, there has to be a comprehensive approach based on the national security policy. I think that is something that I would strongly recommend. And because everything flows from that, number one. Number two is the awareness level of all the stakeholders, particularly those who are dealing with it. I'm sorry to say that understanding of people who are dealing with it across the spectrum, I'm not too sure whether their understanding is at the required level. So that is something which needs to be, they need to be trained, they need to be made awareness level, those who are. To that extent, I'm very happy that national security studies is, as a subject is being propagated,
Right.
popularized. I think that's but the most important is the training of the minds of people. Then the third approach I will strongly recommend is the perception management. Perception management, information warfare, and also the public awareness through various this thing that what does national security mean? What can affect our country? We are a small incident in, not small, but an incident in Nagaland, that has reached all over the world today.
Correct.
And that is, affecting even a very, very important law like OFSFA, So therefore, these are the issues that need to be addressed. And above all is the integrated approach by the various security forces together.
Right.
Just having unified headquarters in Jammu and Kashmir or northeastern states, that may not be adequate to address all this that we have just discussed. But lastly, I would like to say one more point. As far as military is concerned, we cannot have the enemy, attacking us. We have to do away with the enemy. Whosoever picks up arms against the nation, In fact, a Jawan who goes berserk with a weapon, we call him an enemy. Our own Jawan who goes berserk with a firing here and there, he is declared an enemy and he can be killed. No, so therefore, the issue of national security has to be dealt with that what in the military we know as iron hand in a velvet glove. That is how we speak.
Very beautifully summarized. Thank you so much for that. And in fact, I agree with you. I mean, you're far more experienced and you've served in a lot of areas. But I agree with you when you say that people need to be more sensitized in terms of how to report and talk about national security or national security issues. Because coming from a background of journalism, we were never taught a lot of these sensitivities, right? And I'm not blaming any particular media house or journalist. And I think generally for people in the public sphere, they have no idea how to report or write about national security. And at the cost of putting our security personnel at risk and putting perhaps sensibilities at risk, these reportage takes place. And even we've seen that in the case of Nagaland and the entire AFSPA coverage as well, 2611 for that matter, Kashmir for that matter, Kargil, and the examples can go on. So I hope that there is a new policy where people and students especially are educated about how to deal with this, and it's in a way institutionalized. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. This has been a wonderful discussion, and we hope that you can join us again for a discussion like this. General Himalay Singh, thank you so much, sir. Personally, this is your first time on Citti, and Mrs. Saikia and Rami ji is regular on our show. So thank you again for joining. Please have a good day, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.